Welcome to the Homebody Podcast, Fleur. I'm so excited to have you join me.
Thanks for having me, Anna. I'm really happy to be here.
Amazing. I'm so curious. So many of us expect joy to be something that is natural and effortless. And sometimes when it shows up, it can really feel kind of like awkward and fleeting instead. So why do you think joy is something that can sometimes feel difficult for us to fully embrace, really?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I'm really pleased we're talking about it because I think there's a big disconnect with how we're sold joy. Joy is, fancy free, footloose and fancy free people running through fields without a care in the world. And the reality is that's not really what joy is. Joy actually is a lot more fleeting and requires a level of vulnerability that a lot of us aren't prepared for. So it's an emotion, a state, a gift from the universe, an energy from life that really is an invitation to, I think, drop into the impermanence of life and the fact that many things can be true at once. So I know for a lot of us, when we have these moments of joy, for example, you look at your baby sound asleep in the cot and there's a moment where you love it. And then this voice comes in and says, but they won't always be this small and this moment won't last. Or you're on holidays and you're laughing with friends on the beach. And then suddenly this voice comes in and goes, but the seasons are changing next week and you're back at work. And so there's this voice that comes in to spoil joy. And I think if we're not aware of that, it can really take over. Brene Brown calls that foreboding joy, that spoiling of it. I also think that most of us move through our days not willing to be with the impermanence of our lives. The ego loves to encourage us to control things and to think that we control things where in fact we don't. And so joy, it comes and goes so quickly that we have to be okay with the impermanent nature of our lives. I was thinking about a moment that's just really stuck in my mind, probably from 10 years ago when I was bike riding with one of my kids. Bike riding is this huge joy-filled moment for many people because it reminds you of when you were young and that youthful freedom. And he was riding ahead and the light was through the trees and I was behind. And I was just like, this is a moment, life could not get any more perfect than this. And then, of course, he went over like a mark in the road, forward over the front of his bike and he's crying all cut up. And I just remember thinking, that moment just didn't last nearly as long as I wanted it to.
You're right. It's the duality of that, right? I think that's what people struggle with the most is the duality of life, right? Like when you have these really high highs, like joy, it's kind of that, like you were talking about that voice in your head, but it's that realization that this isn't going to stick around. And generally what comes next is going to feel much, much lower than this. And so it's that almost fear of the next thing that's going to occur, the next feeling that you're going to experience, like being able to hold on to something that's intangible is impossible. And therefore you're kind of creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. That next feeling is going to feel worse than that joyful feeling. I think your story like beautifully kind of illustrates that.
And I hear, I started teaching in the Mindfulness for Mum space about a decade ago. And I remember all the conversations, like whenever things were going right and there was this joyfulness, this ease, sleeping well, eating well, going to the park, reaching milestones, there was always this slight heaviness that came with it of either this deep earnest, I've got to enjoy it whilst it lasts, or this fear that it wouldn't last. So there's this secondary stuff that comes in, isn't there, that makes it more difficult to enjoy the pure element of joy.
Yeah. What to you is one of your most joyful experiences, like something that you intentionally create joy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I was thinking a lot about it because there are different types of joy. So For me, sensory joy is a huge one. My sensory world is very, very rich for the good and for the bad. So seeking out sensory moments of joy for me, the change in colour in my landscape, a breeze on my skin, a delicious piece of ripe fruit, hearing the laughter of my children in another room. So the sensory stuff is like my entry point in. And then I use mindfulness techniques to sort of allow that moment to land and linger. I think I also get big moments around purpose, and around synchronicity and feeling like I'm in the right place at the right time. So if you've ever I have moments in my work where I'll create a guided meditation about a river or a landscape or whatever. And then often a couple of days later, I will meet that landscape and I'll just be like, wow, like I am moving through space and time in a very, very cool way here. And that fills me with joy. So the idea that I'm living my purpose and that there is something more to life than what we can see. And then I know for others, it might be like relationships, a deep belly laugh with a friend, playing team sport, creativity, painting, dancing, writing. I mean, what is your entry point into joy? If you had like a joy profile, what would it be?
Definitely nature. Definitely nature is my entry point. Anytime I need to reset or just kind of uplift myself, being out in green spaces, or even if you're not in a space that has like nature available to you, noticing where nature is kind of like bursting through those kind of like concrete landscapes, like little daisies in between concrete paths. They're kind of like my little beacons of joy, and I call them glimmers, so the antidote to kind of like triggers. So our sense of safety, things that make me smile, things that make me feel really happy, things that make me feel kind of connected to myself and the world around me. So nature is definitely one of those. And then obviously like my family is another one of those. But I think nature has this kind of like hardwired link to shifting our state into something more positive. And I think when you can be really intentional with that, it can really allow you to feel and experience joy without that kind of potential sadness that comes with that experience of joy as well, because nature is always everlasting. It's going to be there regardless whether you are there to witness it or not. And I think that really allows me to remain present with that experience too. But you kind of mentioned vulnerability earlier, and I think all of these things like being able to experience nature, being able to connect with your partner or friends and have that kind of connective relationship. What role does vulnerability actually play in making joy feel comfortable or uncomfortable in a certain way?
Yeah, before I answer that, I'll just say I'm with you, nature coming through the cracks. It is one of my favorite things to see in concrete landscape, just a little piece of nature doing its thing. So hearing your story was just like a little joy moment then for us. So thank you for that. The vulnerability piece, and it's much like what you were talking about that duality. I think vulnerability links to our capacity to feel two seemingly contradictory things at once. So we can feel a deep sense of gratitude for our children and the age that they are, whilst also simultaneously holding perhaps a fear of their future. We can enjoy a beautiful sunrise whilst also holding fear for Mother Earth in our hands. So I think the vulnerability piece is about expanding our capacity and our awareness so broad that we can actually hold a multitude of experiences and emotions at once, even the ones that seem to contradict one another.
Yeah. Do you think that, to me, vulnerability is almost like peeling back a layer of yourself? Because we all have these kind of facades in a certain sense that we show to everyone else. And then who we actually are is often slightly different, sometimes wildly different to who we show other people. And to me, vulnerability is like peeling back that layer and just being okay with showing who you are. And I even like in joyful moments, it's like if you are in your head and you're thinking, oh, did I laugh too loudly, or am I laughing too long? Is everyone else kind of on the same page, or is this okay to feel this way type of thing? It's like you show people who you truly are in those moments of like ecstatic joy. And I think that can be really challenging for a lot of people who do potentially feel not comfortable being present with themselves or exposing themselves like that. Do you feel that way as well?
Yeah, it's a great reflection. And I was actually thinking about it. I wrote a book, Wholehearted Confidence, and I had a research group, and I asked people to connect with childhood joy through meditation. And it was amazing how many people, grown adults, 60 years old, 70 years old, recollected stories of when they experienced unbridled joy as a child and were teased, shamed, made to feel unsafe about it, whether they drew a beautiful painting and went to present it to their family and they were sort of teased, told the legs were out of proportion, or they were messy in their back garden playing with the dirt and the earthworms and they got in trouble for being dirty, and get your head out of the clouds, come back to earth. So I feel like for a lot of us, there's probably some moments that happened in our childhood where we were our authentic selves and experienced joy, and something happened that closed us off. So I feel like that's a really interesting reflection. And when you said that, oh, did I laugh too hard? Did I laugh too long?
Yes.
Did I dance with too much movement in my arms? You know, whatever the story we have about it, did I feel too much? That's my story. So I will see something in nature and actually be so moved by it that I can get very teary. And then that can trigger for me stories of being too sensitive, which are some of the childhood stories that I take. So I feel like there's probably an interesting piece in there for people who are listening to get curious about what is the particular vulnerability that surfaces when you are expressing yourself in joyful moments, and could you track that back to something in your past?
I love that. I think we've all probably got micro moments in our histories, whether we're fully conscious of them or whether they come back to us through that mindfulness practice. It's something that has caused almost like a fracturing of the way in which we interact with the world and the way in which we now hold ourselves because of it. And it's really interesting once you start to go down that rabbit hole of like that piece changed the way in which I did everything else. You start to be able to unravel each piece of those puzzles, and then you can start to kind of be your most authentic self again and actually experience unbridled joy once again as well. And I think that is such a empowering and freeing state to kind of operate in when you do just reflect with some curiosity as to your own personal histories as well. Now, I'm curious as to whether or not you think the brain has a negativity bias that can also kind of shift the way in which we experience joyful moments, because I guess I look at it from a way of the brain kind of understanding safety. So when we experience anxiety, we feel unsafe. So if you're experiencing joy and that's uncomfortable to you, then our brain's like, hold on a minute, we have to keep ourselves safe. So we're going to give you this anxious thought, and therefore we're going to bring you back into a state of safety, because feeling joy is not a safe space for us to be in. But I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the brain's negativity bias and why we kind of have that way of moving and operating in the world, really.
Yeah, I think some of us naturally, through our wiring and our temperament and our personality and our soul and whatever, probably find joy easier than others. So I think that's probably the truth. And I feel like joy is like any new state or emotion or experience. It takes a while to, strengthen those muscles, I guess. So you start small and you normalize the sort of contraction that can go on at the same time. So whenever we expand, be it through like a week-long retreat or one moment of seeing a bird perfectly flying through the sky, the ego then just likes to pull us back. So the expansion is very frightening for the ego. And so what we need to do is normalize the contraction that actually comes afterwards. And so an example of this that's sort of related, I went to this beautiful poetry, David Whyte, beautiful Irish poet and philosopher. I could not have felt more expansive. Wasn't afraid of dying. It was just so good. And then the next day I came home and I just picked this ridiculous fight with a friend that was so childlike and just not the best version of me. And I was thinking, how can I have gone from this massive state of expansion to this real regressed contraction? And so when you can learn to observe that without the judgment of, I'm a fraud, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad friend, I'm not really the real deal in terms of mindfulness if I'm picking a fight with my friend, whatever. You can normalize this expansion and then the contraction that happens in all forms of self-inquiry, really. And you would see it from a nervous system perspective, like if you've been in fight or flight for a long time, if you've been activated and then you're asked to be in stillness, there's going to be this residue that comes up, like the waves bringing all the sand up. And so if we can prepare ourselves for that and normalize it and again expand our awareness to hold that, then it becomes easier. So joy, it's okay if joy comes with a side serve of contraction afterwards. That's actually just what life's about. And I think in terms of the negativity bias, if you're trying to strengthen your neural pathways for joy or positive states or experiences, the key would be around joy to linger in the moment. So you linger in moments by engaging so let's say you have a beautiful walk in nature. You linger in that moment, you engage your senses, you breathe into it, you allow it to have an impact on your nervous system, maybe connect to your values, your purpose. And through the lingering, that's when you move like an experience from being just a fleeting state to a more permanent trait. And you could experiment with that with joy.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're exactly right. I look at it as a building of resilience almost into the nervous system to actually experience different emotions, states, feelings. And I think for a lot of people, we are so kind of honed in on being really productive or being really like hardworking and getting all of our ducks lined in a row. But when it comes to actually that childlike play or the experience of joy, it can feel like, oh, no, I can't lean into this too much because it's a frivolous sort of activity. And so I think for a lot of people, they've kind of closed down that part of themselves subconsciously, consciously throughout our narratives, but also through societal pressures. And so like just touching the edge of joy and being able to actually be bathed in that sensory experience, because joy is such a sensory experience, right? Like it is normally when we're kind of like hitting all of our different sensations, we are feeling certain feelings towards the world around us or to a greater purpose. We are bathed in different lights. Our eyes are kind of taken by different things. We are experiencing either stillness or chaos. And all of this is like a huge sensory experience. And when you can actually kind of pause for a moment and take note of those things, I feel like you can start to kind of create a bit more of a practical way to experience joy for yourself, because sometimes just even dipping your toe in experiencing joy can be kind of difficult as an adult, right? Especially if you're not someone that has kind of explored the things that feel good for you, because they do seem like something that's like, I can only play on the weekends, or I can't experience too much happiness because the things are going to come crashing down around me. So if you're looking at joy as a practice, how do you start to kind of expansively create those intentional moments for yourself? And you personally, like how often are you trying to input joy into your day-to-day life as well?
They're beautiful reflections of yours. And I think there are powerful reminder of how many messages we're receiving externally that joy, play, pleasure, it is not valued as much as productivity. I mean, how is it when you go to the shops and the person who's packing the bags is, "Oh, so what are you doing next?" And imagine if I said, "Oh, I'm going to go and sit outside and watch the light fall on the trees."
If I was that person, I'd be like, that sounds amazing, but I can imagine the confusion that comes from that.
There's an expectation, isn't there? Or even, if someone's partner who's had a busy day at work comes home and worked a full day and money's tight and says to the other person in the family, "What did you do today?" Like, you're going to be a little bit shy about saying that you've
Yeah.
just been feeling the breeze on your skin. So there is that external thing. But in terms of cultivating your own inquiry in your own joyful practice, I would say the first thing people could do is explore what their values are. So if your values are awe and wonder, creativity, connection, then that might give you a clue as to what your joy profile might be. You could have a think back to times in your childhood. That roadmap is very profound. The things that really lit you up. Did you like swimming? Did you like getting your hands dirty? Did you like performing for other people? And so that might give you some clues as well. And then reminding yourself that joy doesn't need to be a big moment. It's almost like the more we can harness our attention, the more we can make the ordinary moments feel extraordinary. So real joy, like real gratitude, is cultivated most strongly with the simple things, because it feels like a giant exhale that you can stop striving, that right here, right now, you have everything that you need and that life is supporting you. So for me, how I would allow more joy into my life is a simple walk. And when I go for a walk, I don't listen to a podcast. I don't call my friends or my mum. I just walk, feeling the breeze on my skin. That's a really beautiful one. And my dog. Like, dogs are just the fastest pathway to joy.
Sometimes I grab my dog's face and I look into her eyes. I'm like, give me that oxytocin. But I love that. I'm going to circle back to you. At the very beginning, you were talking about joy is not as valued in society. And it's really ironic, I think, because in the moments where I feel completely uninhibited, joyful, playful, it's the moments that I feel most connected and intuitive and grounded in the present moment. And that is generally where most of my productivity kind of comes from as well. And so I feel like we've kind of, as a society, removed the things that help us the most in being productive members of society, and whatever that is, whether you're a mother or you're out at working or you're starting your own business, whatever your pursuit is, I feel like as soon as you detach from this idea that you have to be super present with exactly what's in front of you and you have to take it very seriously. As soon as you detach from that, you can come at your work from a different perspective and you have so much more empathy and understanding and creativity to inject into that space. Is that something that you have noticed as well? I feel like you, of all people, would like understand this, and your work has kind of centered around mindfulness practice. But like, is that something that you've noticed too? As soon as you kind of disconnect from that outcome or disconnect from taking life so seriously, things start to shift in your favor.
Absolutely. When people look at how quickly I produce work, like I've written 3 books in 2 years, 10 courses, like it's a lot. But none of that has been through that striving state. It's all been through presence, synchronicity, intuition, flow, allowing life to unfold. And then the information, the ideas, the energy just comes in fast and furious with a real sense of calibration. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't times that you've just got to put your head down and get to it, writing your emails and, editing your books and doing the hard stuff. But if you can somehow get the balance right with more of this flow state, which always has an element of joy to it, less striving, because when we move through life from a baseline of not enough, we just never get there. We just never get to that sense of satisfaction, because we achieve the goal, we do the thing, and then we just shift the goalposts. Yeah. Whereas when you can work from a place of already being enough, when you do achieve the things and publish the book and create the app or whatever, you don't have to switch mindsets because you've already been enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a side note, I was just thinking about, like, my most creative moments tend to come in the middle of the night. And I wonder whether we're in that deep or REM sleep is where we kind of have that uninhibited creativity kind of show itself to us a lot of the time. And I'll wake up and be like, I've got to write that down, like write that note down. And I'm sure there is a juxtaposing like brain region that is connected when we feel joy or play when we're awake as well to that kind of sleep state too, but I'm not aware of it really at this point. But just as a side note, I was like, that's super interesting that when we're in these states, of course, yes, there's times to like buckle down and focus on what your work is. But when we're in these states, there is a kind of removal of your ego or your sense of like individuality. Like there is a deep connection that comes from being in this state. So generally, like you're surrounded by other people or you're surrounded by nature and you feel really connected outside of yourself. And I think when we sleep, that potentially, I'm just saying things that I have no scientific knowledge of right now, but I was just trying to put the dots together there, but that's just a side note. And I think what you were just talking about as well in terms of like not feeling enough is obviously something that is really strongly linked to like perfectionism and that sense of moving the goalposts or feeling really self-critical about yourself. So in terms of perfectionism and presence or mindfulness and being present, how do these two things fit together, and is one the antidote for the other?
So first of all, you would create.
Yeah. I feel like we can all do with a little bit more tenderness towards ourselves. Absolutely. Now, Fleur, you have a new book that is coming out. Do you want to share a little bit about your new book and what people can expect and walk away with inside of your new book as well? Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love that. And I think like you're absolutely right. This very inauthentic masculine way of looking at confidence was fairly dominating in the space for a long time. And I think there is a very intuitive, feminine, sometimes feminine way of uplifting your natural inclinations to shine. And I think that is a beautiful thing to bring into the world. So just to kind of round things off, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge today on the Homebody Podcast. But how can people find you? Where can they buy your book? And if they want to get in contact with you, how can they do that? Well, I will put all of those links in the show notes below as well if you want to get in touch with Fleur, and definitely go and grab her book, Wholehearted Confidence, because I feel like it will definitely fit really nicely within your nervous system to create a sense of safety and happiness and a sense of confidence as well. So thank you so much for tuning into the Homebody Podcast. And thank you, Fleur, once again. And I'll see you all next week. Yay, we did it.